We think we know the narrative of Brad Pitt. I mean, I would argue that for the last, 30 years, his life has been one of the most consumable products in Hollywood.
Oh, absolutely.
We have the blockbuster movies, of course, but then you've got the marriages that felt like, I don't know, geopolitical alliances.
Right, and the divorces that just dominated news cycles for years, the winery lawsuits. I mean, it feels like every single square inch of his life has been mapped and sold.
Exactly. It's all been very loud.
Yeah.
But we got our hands on a really compelling dossier today. It's a piece titled The Singular Imprint of Brad Pitt's First True Love.
Mm.
And what struck me right away is how quiet it is. This is not a timeline of scandals. It's really a psychological profile that argues we've been looking at all the wrong things.
That's the core paradox this whole deep dive gets into. We tend to equate significance with visibility. You know, if a relationship was on the cover of Vanity Fair, we just assume it was the most important one. But this source makes a fascinating counter-argument. It says that visibility, well, it actually dilutes intimacy. It posits that the most profound imprint on his life came from a relationship before the world decided who he was.
And I want to be really clear for everyone listening. We are not doing gossip today. The source doesn't even name the woman, and frankly, her name is totally irrelevant to what we're talking about.
Completely.
This is about memory. It's about that, that specific clarity you get when you look back at your life from the vantage point of age. The text starts by describing Pitt's current demeanor, and it's not the movie star on a press tour vibe at all.
No, it's described as a shift toward melancholic clarity. That's a phrase that really stood out to me. The source notes that in his private conversations lately, he's become more and more reflective.
Interesting.
He speaks less, he chooses his words with this extreme precision, and seems to be looking backward. But, and this is the key part, it's not described as a midlife crisis. He's not trying to recapture his youth. It's described as an assessment.
See, that's what I found so interesting, because usually when you hear about celebrities looking back, it's painted as regret. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that movie. Or
Worried that person.
Right. But you're saying this is different.
The distinction the text makes is between regret and integration. Regret is just wishing the past were different. Integration is understanding how the past actually built the person you are now.
Okay.
And the source claims Pitt has acknowledged that one specific connection from his pre-fame life left a mark no one else ever quite replaced. Now, the skeptic in you might say, well, that's just nostalgia.
I was just going to say that. Isn't that just the classic golden age syndrome? We all think high school was better because we didn't have, back pain and taxes.
All right.
How do we know this isn't just him romanticizing a time with less responsibility?
That is a valid pushback. And the source actually gets into that. It argues this isn't about the time period being better. It's about the nature of the connection being, well, structurally different. It boils it down to three pillars that just couldn't exist later in his life: timing, vulnerability, and authenticity.
Wow.
And it uses this metaphor that I think we really need to unpack: the armor.
The armor of fame. Yes. I underlined that 3 times. The text says this relationship happened at a moment when Pitt was not yet fully armored by global fame. That sounds poetic, but let's break down the psychology of that. Because armor sounds cool, like Iron Man or something. But in a relationship, armor is a disaster.
It's lethal to intimacy. I mean, think about what armor actually does. It's designed to be impenetrable. It deflects arrows. It stops knives.
But it also stops touch.
It stops touch, exactly. You lose all tactility.
Yeah.
The source argues that once Pitt ascended to that, stratosphere of fame, we're talking mid-90s Legends of the Fall, Cessa 7 era, he had to build a protective shell just to survive the scrutiny.
So it wasn't really a choice. It was more of a survival mechanism.
Absolutely. If he walked around with his heart on his sleeve in 1998, the tabloids would have eaten him alive. He had to construct a persona, a kind of performance version of himself, just to interface with the world.
But this early relationship...
It happened before the armor was forged. He was, to use a word the writer implies, he was porous. He could absorb the world, and more importantly, he could let someone else in to see him without the filter of Brad Pitt, the icon.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. It's the difference between someone loving you and someone loving the idea of you.
Yes.
The source describes this before version of him as less guarded, more emotionally present. It paints this picture of partnership rather than performance.
Partnership rather than performance is the critical distinction here. In his later high-profile relationships, there was always a third entity in the room: the public. When you're half of a global power couple, the relationship itself becomes a brand. It has, as we said, stakeholders. It has a public narrative to maintain. In that early relationship, the only stakeholders were the two people in the room.
Okay, but if it was so pure and unarmored and, perfect,
Yeah.
why did it end? Because usually when we hear true love, we assume happily ever after.
Yeah.
But the source frames the breakup not as a failure of love, but more like a tragedy of physics.
Velocity is the word that comes to mind from the text. It describes an intense but fragile dynamic. And you have to remember the era, this was likely the late 80s, maybe very early 90s.
Okay.
Both of their careers were accelerating at a rate that is, frankly, hard for most of us to even comprehend. The source lists these specific factors. Expectations were rising. The world was just moving faster than they could control.
It reminds me of that saying, right person, wrong time, which, I don't know, it always feels like a bit of a cop-out to me. Like, if it's the right person, don't you make the time work? Or is that just a naive view?
I think it's a little naive when you're dealing with this level of trajectory. I mean, imagine you're 24 years old and you're suddenly being strapped to a rocket ship.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You don't have the emotional tools yet to say, hey, stop the rocket, I need to nurture this thing. You're just holding on for dear life. The source really emphasizes that they were pulled apart by circumstance, not by malice. It wasn't a lack of love. It was a surplus of chaos.
And that chaos eventually hardened into the life we all know.
Mm-hmm.
The source then shifts here to contrast that early loss with the perfect surface of his later years. And this is where the writing gets really, really sharp.
It does. It doesn't trash his marriages or anything. It's very respectful in the families he built. But it notes that those later relationships carried heavier burdens.
It creates this dichotomy between complexity and simplicity.
Exactly. The later relationships looked perfect on magazine covers. I mean, that's literally the definition of Hollywood success. But underneath, the text notes they were loaded with public scrutiny, legal battles, the immense pressure of just maintaining that power couple image.
It's the difference between a relationship that's a sanctuary and a relationship that's an empire.
Precisely. An empire requires administration. It requires defense. A sanctuary just requires presence. The analysis in this dossier suggests that fame acts as a kind of distortion field. It amplifies everything around you, but it distorts intimacy because you can never be fully sure if you're being seen for who you are.
Or for what you represent. It's the observer effect in physics,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
The very act of observing something changes it. If billions of people are observing your marriage, well, your marriage changes.
It has to. And the tragedy the source points to is that when he lost that first love, he didn't just lose a person. He lost the last version of his life that was unburdened by expectation. He lost the context where he could just be a guy rather than an asset.
Which brings us to the aha moment in the piece, the realization. Because for years, Pitt, like most of us, probably thought, well, I'm young, I'm successful, there will be another one.
The infinite buffet fallacy.
Right. The idea that the world is just full of amazing options, and if this one doesn't work out, the next one will be just as good or better.
It's a very standard mistake of youth. But when you are a global celebrity, that mistake is amplified because the world is literally throwing options at you. You are surrounded by beautiful, interesting people constantly. So the assumption that love is abundant feels empirically true.
But it's not.
But it's not. The source says Pitt has arrived at a very hard truth. Singular connections do not repeat themselves.
Oof, that's a tough pill to swallow. The idea that chemistry is a non-renewable resource.
It is. You can find love again, and he did. You can find partnership again, and he did. But you cannot replicate the specific vulnerability of being known before you were armored. That only happens once. And the text is very careful here to say this is not a slight against his later partners. It's not that they weren't good enough. It's that they encountered a different man. They met the icon. She met the human.
So he's not pining for her in a way that's disrespectful. He's mourning the loss of being seen without the filter.
Yes. And I think that's why the source frames this as acceptance rather than drama. He's not trying to blow up his life to go find her. He's simply acknowledging that the foundation of his emotional life was built by someone the world doesn't even know.
Which brings us to today, the closing of the circle. The source describes his current life as focused on work, personal growth, and a quieter existence, which honestly sounds like the only sane response to 30 years of noise.
It does. And the observation is that he appears more at peace than he has been in years. That peace comes from this integration we talked about. It's acknowledging, okay, I made a mistake. I thought that kind of love was common. It wasn't. It was rare. I lost it. But it shaped me.
And it shaped him as an artist, too. The source implies that a lot of the depth he brings to his roles now, especially the later ones, think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or Ad Astra,
Oh, for sure.
that it comes from this well of memory.
Pain is a powerful instructor. The realization that you can have the entire world at your feet, Oscars, money, fame, and still miss the simplicity of sitting on a couch with someone who just likes you, that brings a certain gravitas to a person. It strips away the vanity.
It's interesting because we started this conversation talking about Brad Pitt, the celebrity, but this feels incredibly universal.
It is.
You don't have to be a movie star to understand the concept of the one that got away or the before version of yourself.
That's why the source material is so strong. It uses Pitt as a lens, but the subject is really the human condition. We all have armor we put on as we get older. Maybe it's not fame, maybe it's cynicism, maybe it's just being busy and tired and wary of getting hurt again. We all harden up.
And we all have that person in our past who knew us before the hardening.
Exactly. The person who knew you when you were broke or unsure or just starting out. And there's a specific kind of grief in realizing that you can't go back to that version of yourself, and you can't go back to the person who held that version.
But the source ends on a surprisingly hopeful note. It's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all. It ends with a thought on permanence. The idea that love doesn't have to last forever to be significant. We tend to judge relationships by their longevity, right? Oh, they were married 50 years, that was a success. They dated for 2, that was a failure.
And this text just challenges that whole metric.
Completely. It argues that a 2-year relationship that fundamentally alters your DNA is more successful than a 20-year marriage where you're just roommates.
Or at least just as significant.
Just as significant. The final sentiment from the source is something I think everyone listening should really sit with. It says, "Some loves do not fade, they wait, silently, in memory, shaping us long after the story ends."
Shaping us long after the story ends. That's beautiful. It implies that nothing is ever really lost. It just becomes part of the architecture.
It becomes the foundation. And I think for him, for Pitt, acknowledging that foundation is what's finally allowing him to find that peace the source describes. He's not fighting the ghost anymore, he's thanking it.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to leave it. It's a reminder to maybe take a second and, appreciate the people who knew us before. And also a reminder that what we see in the tabloids is usually less than 1% of the actual story.
Always. The truth is usually quieter and much more human.
Thank you so much for breaking this down with me today. This was a heavy one, but I think a necessary one.
My pleasure. It's always good to look behind the curtain.
And thank you to everyone listening. We will be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, take care of your before versions.